I shared a post on Instagram recently about the difference between being led by the ego or the wounded inner child versus being led by the true self when it comes to love and relationships. And you guys loved it, so I wanted to do a deep dive here on my YouTube channel talking about that difference, because so many of us, and I include myself in the past, get stuck in painful relationship patterns because we're operating from our wounds. Our mindset is based on what our ego is telling us, not based on the reality of things, which is the perspective that our true self has. So before we get into it, I want to welcome you in case you're new here. My name is Lindsay. I am the Real Love Alchemist, and I am a coach, breakup mentor, dating coach, and a certified energy healing practitioner. And I help my clients go from bad relationships to real love with the magic of subconscious work. So if you're interested in working with me, I will leave the link to do that in the description below. So let's first talk about the difference between the ego and what I call the true self. Some people call the true self the soul or your higher self. Basically, it's the part of you that is unconditioned, the part of you that is free from negative beliefs. Some people also say this is you embodied as a master. There's many different ways to describe it. But basically, when I talk about the true self, what I'm meaning is the opposite of the ego. And the ego is basically your conditioning. It's all of the wounds that you're carrying around from the past. And these wounds often create certain beliefs, certain thought patterns. And when you're stuck in that place, it can be very, very difficult. It can be really painful. And you can come to believe certain things about yourself, about love, about relationships, about the world that are not true, but they can feel very, very true, and they can keep us stuck. So I've got my list here of different things that the ego would say when it comes to love and relationships versus what the true self would say. So the first thing here is, oftentimes if you are in a dynamic with someone where you really want them to choose you, but they are emotionally unavailable, the ego would say, getting this emotionally unavailable partner to choose me is what will heal me. And let me know in the comments if this has felt true for you. Often what the ego is saying is quite unconscious at times, and so you may not hear this directly as like a thought or a message or a belief, but you might just feel continuously compelled to pursue unavailable partners because deep down, this is actually what you believe to be true. You believe that in order to heal these wounds from childhood of being abandoned, not being fully chosen, not being supported, that if you get this unavailable person to choose you, that's what will heal you and that's what will make you feel whole. And that's not true at all. What will actually heal you is breaking away from those partners and choosing somebody who fully chooses you instead. So the message that would come from the true self when it comes to this particular pattern is to say that you will heal the pain from these wounds of being rejected, abandoned, not supported, not by getting this unavailable partner to choose you, but by choosing partners instead who fully choose you. That's when the healing comes through. Another common story that the ego likes to tell when it comes to relationships is the story about sexual chemistry, or really just any general chemistry. The ego, the wounded inner child, will often tell us that great chemistry, especially great sexual chemistry, that's real love. That's what it is. Real love means great chemistry. Not always the case. The true self would tell you that the sexual chemistry that you might be experiencing in a toxic relationship or a relationship that isn't healthy, that doesn't even come close to how good intimacy can feel where you're also treated well, where you're loved and supported and cherished. Because if you're here watching this video, you probably know that chemistry does not always mean that a relationship is good for you, that a relationship is healthy for you. So when we're evolving from seeing things from the ego's perspective to seeing things from the true self's perspective, we actually kind of have to separate that chemistry from love. chemistry is just, it's a feeling, it's just a thing. It is still important to have in a relationship. You do want some chemistry, but the chemistry in itself is not the love. That's not what the true self would say. Something else the ego will often say is, I will never find real love because the people who I've loved, who I were really into, never love me back. And again, all of these stories are coming from a place of pain. The ego is the wounded inner child. So at some point, this felt very true to you and probably still feels true to you today. But what the true self would tell you is not that you're never going to find love. What it's going to tell you is that the reason for this experience that you're having now, feeling like you'll never find real love, is due to some things that are fully within your control. And what it would say is that you haven't found that real love yet because there have been some things in the way of that. There have been some fears of intimacy on your end that have drawn you towards partners who couldn't fully love you. When you heal those intimacy fears, when you open up to love, it will actually be very easy to find someone who fully loves you. You're going to be able to choose those types of partners instead of going for the unavailable and the avoidant partners. Ego will often tell you that you have to be good enough, attractive enough, wealthy enough, fun enough in order to be loved. And that is simply not true. What your true self says is that you are completely lovable just as you are right now. When you realize this, you'll be able to find love so much more easily, because that's the truth deep within us. That's the truth of the universe. You are already completely and fully lovable as you are. What blocks us from seeing that are our literal subconscious blocks, and that's what I help my clients to release. Because once they do, once they realize that, once they see, I am lovable, that is the truth, then it's much easier to choose people who fully choose you and to show up in the world as your authentic self, and that's incredibly attractive. Another story that the ego likes to tell is that if you were more blank, fill in the blank with whatever story your ego is telling you. If I were more attractive, if I were more interesting, if I were, we can even say less, if I were less needy, whatever it is, then my ex would have stayed. And that can feel so true at times. It can feel like you just weren't enough, and that's why they left. True self says, if this person is not in your life anymore, trust that something better is coming for you. Trust that that thing needed to leave so that you could make room for something amazing, something even better than you had before to come into your life. And I can tell you that this has been true for me. I was devastated at some of the endings of my relationship. And I was in that mindset of like, well, if I had just been XYZ, if I had just been better or whatever it was that I was thinking at the time, then my ex would have stayed. The relationship could have worked out. Today, I am so glad those relationships didn't work out because I'm in a much better place. And it really was true that something better was coming into my life. One last thing the ego likes to say. When you're in a lot of pain after a breakup, the ego likes to say, tell this story, my heart is broken and I'll never find love again. Because that's what it feels like, right? When you're going through the pain of letting go of someone and grieving someone, it absolutely feels like that. But if you listen very closely, your true self will come in and tell you something like this. Your heart is breaking open. You are not breaking, it is breaking open. And the next time you fall in love, you'll be able to love that much more deeply. And that is the truth too. Because if we're talking about the true self's perspective, you can never be broken. You're only breaking open. That's essentially what the spiritual awakening journey is. It's a journey from pain, moving through your suffering, releasing all of your pain. And in that pain, it's going to feel like your heart is breaking. You're going to feel completely broken at times, but you're not. Your heart is breaking open. And I've been on this journey for many, many years now. And I have thought many, many times that my heart is completely broken. I'm never going to love again. And you know what? It's much more open than it was in the past. I don't feel broken at all anymore. I actually feel more whole. And my heart is now that much more open to real love, to healthy love, and I can let it in. So just know if you're feeling that way, that you're never going to love again and your heart is broken, not true. It's just breaking open. So when I posted this, I also got a lot of questions from people about how do you tell the difference on a day-to-day basis when you're operating from ego versus when you're operating from your true self. And what I would tell you is if you are hearing a voice that sounds critical, that sounds judgmental, that sounds negative, that is from your ego. That's always going to be from your ego. Your true self is going to feel unconditionally loving. It's going to feel light. It's going to feel supportive. It's going to feel uplifting. It doesn't operate from a place of fear and negativity like your ego does, like the wounded inner child does. So in general, the voice of the ego can be a lot louder than the voice of your true self. The true self can sound very soft. It can sound very quiet. It's what people describe as the still small voice within you. That's your true self. It comes through and it never pressures you. It never tells you you should do something. That's a sign of the ego, is if it says you should do this. It's more of like a gentle suggestion. Like, wouldn't it be nice to do this? That's the big difference between the ego and the true self. If you find yourself in a place of a lot of negativity and you can see that you're probably mostly operating from the ego, then check out this video here. I talk about what's really going on in your mind and how you can change it, how you can move from negativity to feeling and thinking more positively.